I think the first thing you should know when trying to advance individualism is to look at voting by race and ideology in the 2012 and 2016 elections. So in the 2012 election, we can see how self-described liberals voted, how self-described moderates voted, and how self-described conservatives voted. And among blacks and Hispanics, the majority of self-described conservatives voted for Obama. Among those who opposed wealth redistribution, 86% of blacks voted for Obama. Now among Hispanics opposed to wealth redistribution, 47% of those voted for Obama. So for Hispanics, Romney won by 6 points among those Hispanics who opposed wealth redistribution. Among blacks, who are conservatives and who identify with the Republican Party and who also believe that the government does too much to help blacks, even they vote Democrat. And blacks who want smaller government and think that the government does too much to help blacks, even they identify with the Democrat Party over the Republican Party, 79-21. These are just some things to keep in mind if you think that individualism is some sort of actionable political program, that even people who literally agree with your ideas don't support the closest thing to something that could possibly implement those ideas, which is the Republican Party, as flawed as that is. Now, among millennials, when asked to pick the 3 most important identifiers out of a list of 8 things, one of which was class, one was religion, there's a bunch of other stuff, the most common thing they picked among blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and whites was race. Yes, even among whites, race was the most common thing picked, though by thinner margins than these other groups. And I don't know if Peterson has done a survey of his audience and fans for their racial composition. I don't think he has, because he doesn't think that way. The audience of his conferences look really, really white. I suspect all the people who view him on the internet are really, really white. And so what he's doing is he's convincing mainly these people here to not think in terms of their race and think of themselves as individuals, or think of an identifier more as an ideology. Now, what would be cool is if Peterson explicitly targeted these other groups over here, these blacks, Hispanics, and Asians, and tried to get them down to the level of racial identity that whites are at, and then work to move everyone down even further if he actually wants to succeed. But as it happens, Peterson, for all his wisdom and all the interesting anecdotes and perspectives that he seems to have, is just working on hammering down this white number even further. And that's a real practical problem. And there's nothing principled about doing this. For individualism to work as a principle, everyone has to go along with it. If you're acting as an individual while everyone else is grouping up and kicking your ass as a result, you're not actually living by individualistic principles. The principle you're actually living by is whites are unorganized, atomic individuals, while other groups organize and get what they want at the expense of whites. That's what you're actually living by. You're not actually living by your principles. You're just being a chump and being taken advantage of by these principles you think you're living by. And I don't think I have to explain to Peterson fans that these groups have gotten a lot of what they wanted at the expense of whites. They get both private and public sector racial quotas, they have racial advocacy groups, and they openly and vocally vote for and demand for politicians to cater to their specific racial interests. And you, the individualist, you're asking them to give up all of these goodies that they get from organizing racially for the morality and the high ideals of individual autonomy. And that seems very unlikely that they would ever do that. It seems like even if they agreed with what you were saying, they might still organize racially because that's what works.
Well, having the right degenerate into identity politics does not seem to be a positive solution. So one of the things I would say is that, I understand why the identity politics that has been practiced so assiduously and so devastatingly by the left has been co-opted by the right. I understand that.
Okay, I have a challenge for anyone who's watching. Go a month without using the term left. The term left and right, these are crutches that you use. You point off in a vague general direction and say, here be dragons off to the left, instead of actually describing what these people actually are. It's blacks and Hispanic racial nationalists, and increasingly now Asian racial nationalist contingent that votes on racial lines, and you got a few traitor whites who block up with them. Hispanics have more variation that lines up with their having variation in European admixture, with the whiter Hispanics being more likely to vote Republican. Most of Peterson's psychologizing of what he calls the left is really only relevant for the traitor whites, the Sarumans and the Wormtongues. But the majority of the Democrat Party today, and a growing majority of the Democrat Party, are just brown people for whom all the weird psychology of the self-described liberal that Peterson talks about doesn't apply. They're just orcs.
But then here's what I would say to the people on the right who are playing that game. If you play the game of your enemies and you win their game. You don't win. That's not victory. You just become the most successful exponent of their pathology. Well, how is that a good thing? It's a bad thing. We shouldn't be playing that game.
It's not playing their game, it's operating in the physical world. You're not operating in the physical world. You're off in your little world of forms. You're calling normal human behavior that's getting them victory. You're calling that pathological, while calling the individualist philosophy that has gotten whites into the mess that we're in, calling that healthy. What's actually happening is that there's a growing number of whites who aren't playing your game anymore, Peterson. We're tired of being chumps. We're tired of being taken to the cleaners for trying to uphold some misguided principles. And if we win, if we recover the right for whites to organize, if we roll back anti-white racial discrimination, possibly have entire states that become de facto white ethno-states, or maybe, pipe dream, manage to break off from the US entirely, I'm sorry, that's me winning my game. That's me winning reality. And you coming in here and saying, oh, that's just you playing their game. Listen, asshole, it's called existence and survival, and the only one playing games here is you.
And I've always decided against it because it seemed to me that the proper level of analysis with regards to the solution of the problem that we're facing isn't political. And that's why I think it's a mistake when what I'm doing gets politicized either by me or others.
Buddy, I'm sorry, but this is really stupid. You clearly have a political agenda, and you're trying to advance your political agenda through a bottom-up psychology strategy. What you're doing is inherently political. Let's not dwell on this. This is stupid. This little cute thing you're trying to do, say, I'm not really political here. Like, just stop. It's dumb. It's not fooling anyone.
So, I think that what you do is you aim high and put yourself together and stay the hell away from the ideologues, because they're hiding behind a wall. They're not able to come out and fight on their own behalf.
Now this is amazing. Peterson telling people to stay away from ideologues. Peterson, you are an ideologue who has not just a political philosophy, but who is trying to hook that political philosophy into people's personal lives, which may be good or bad. That's something to talk about at another time, but your ideology is far more total than what you accuse your opponents of doing. And race nationalism that you sneer at isn't even really an ideology at all. It's just group identity. And sure, if you think my race, best race, you'll be receptive to anything that confirms that, but don't confuse this with a proper ideology. People sort of repeating things that confirms how good their group is and how bad other groups are in comparison. That's not ideology, that's just biology. White nationalism is the default for white people. It's what white people were instinctively, organically, when they came into first contact with other races. That's what the United States proved and what Canada has mostly proved. There was no doctrine telling white people to take their own side. It's not an ideology, it's just a natural will to existence.
And so, the way forward through the ideological mess, and that's the lesson of Western culture, is to place the individual at the place of paramount importance, and to make the group identity emerge only when necessary, and secondarily, if ever.
That's the lesson you draw, huh? Another lesson might be to keep your countries white or you'll end up like South Africa. Keep your cities white or you'll end up like Detroit or St. Louis. And besides, all the political ideas Peterson likes have only existed where you have whites in charge. To cavalierly separate ideas from the biological substrate, the real flesh and blood that holds them, with, to be frank, a faith-based belief that anyone can be rationalized into these beliefs and that every man on the planet is a European just below the surface, how much more irresponsible can you get? As for the individual being of paramount importance, well, it sure looks to me like the expression of individual Asians is to clump up in a racial collective. So really, Peterson should be saying that he wants to elevate the individual, unless the individuals band together and start doing what he calls identity politics, because that's not individualism, but is collectivism. Look, man, people do stuff. The terms individualistic and collectivistic, these are very broad, general terms. They're not precise. Don't take them so literally. And when you say things like, we have to elevate the individual over the group, okay, that reveals that you're taking the language far too literally and you don't understand that these are just very general terminologies. The world is far too complicated for statements like, elevate the individual over the collective.
The problem with that fundamentally is, first of all, that those category systems are extraordinarily loose and they're indefinitely multipliable, because if you take any given individual, there's probably, well, it's the postmodern problem. There we go. It's the postmodern problem that there's almost an infinite number of ways to categorize any given individual. So how the hell do you figure out which group they belong to? And that's actually a major problem. Like if you're 1/8 black, what does that make you exactly? Are you black? Are you white? Are you oppressed? Are you oppressor? Are you, let's see, 1/2 as oppressed as someone who's 1/4 black? Does it work out arithmetically that way? Hey, I'm dead serious about this, man. If we're going to play this sort of game, that's exactly the question that has to be asked, right?
First off, you're dealing with a theoretical problem that doesn't exist in the wilds. People divide themselves up in the way they actually do. And for you to come in afterwards and then say, well, these lines of distinction are completely arbitrary, or saying that race is arbitrary. Well, to me, this seems wrong to just call it arbitrary, but I'm inclined to just say, sure, it's arbitrary, you win a cookie, and just move on. Now, someone making laws based on race can and will cross these bridges when they come to them, so as a practical matter, what he's saying is not very important. But the reason this is so stupid is that his objections have already been proven to not matter. The Democrat Party coalition is getting what it wants, you're not. Peterson is correct in that there's no racial policy headquarters that has answered all of these questions, but they still won despite not having done so. They don't have to answer these questions. So Peterson is sitting here on the losing side of a 50-year political battle, pointing out this glaring problem that his enemy has that they'd better resolve or else. And that just about encapsulates the folly of Peterson's program. Now, I don't want to give the impression that Peterson is all bad. This video was about my criticism of him, not about stuff I agree with. There's certainly a lot of stuff that I agree with Jordan Peterson about, and you can pick up on that implicitly in this video. He certainly has landed a body blow against racial egalitarianism, against the insane belief that all identifiable groups have the same average innate traits. But for all the good stuff that Peterson has to offer, at the end of the day, it's just race-neutered individualism, and it's going to lead you where it has led us thus far, which is down to blind alley.